This is Zero Signal, where security leaders stop waiting for certainty and start leading through it. I'm Conor Sherman.
And I'm Stuart Mitchell.
Let's get into it. Zero Signal is brought to you by Sysdig. Threat actors are compromising cloud accounts in under 8 minutes. Vulnerabilities are being exploited within 10 hours of disclosure. That's the defender's window, and it keeps closing. Attackers aren't waiting on dashboards. They go straight for what's running. Real time is the only timeline that matters. And that's why Forrester named Sysdig a leader in its latest wave for the cloud-native application protection platforms. Runtime is where real risk shows up, and runtime is what Sysdig is built for. So stop watching and start defending. Learn more at sysdig.com and check out the link in the description. Zero Signal is brought to you by RiskPoint. When the mission is on the line, you don't want a vendor. You want to work with people who've actually been there. I've worked with RiskPoint directly. Together, we took an organization from zero to FedRAMP moderate across a real cloud footprint, and a business unit from zero to CMMC, and we did it all under 9 months. That happened because this team had done it before and moved at the speed the work demanded. Trust, experience, and pace, right when I needed all three. They call it security and compliance made human. Practitioners, not salespeople. In it with you for the long haul, from readiness all the way to authorization. FedRAMP, CMMC, SOC 2, and cloud. Where you go for advice matters. And if you're staring down an audit or an authorization, go to riskpoint.com. That's RISCPOINT.com. Check out the link in the description. Welcome back to Zero Signal. Today we have our really special guest. We have Phil Venables, four-time CISO for Goldman Sachs, and then recently the CISO for Google. He is now the venture partner at Ballistic Ventures and one of the authors of one of the most well-read and well-respected blogs on the cybersecurity community. So Phil, thank you so much for coming on the pod today.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Great to see you guys.
So you have written a lot about the transformation that's happening for security teams today, and where, as I've been reading and prepping and looking forward to this conversation, one of the things that really stood out for me has been like this through line of how, generally speaking, as an industry, as we think about our security programs, we fundamentally need to retool how we do and what we do for speed, and speed's becoming the principal thing through that. So I'd love it if you could just expand on maybe your time at Google or what you're seeing in the venture community. What are some of the patterns? What are some of the principles that you think that we as security leaders and CISOs need to be adopting into our security programs so that we can realize this mandate that you're laying out for us is like, we need to start retooling for speed. How we go about that?
Yeah, exactly. So the way I kind of think about this is if you're a defender, you need to outpace attackers or stay ahead of the threat or stay ahead of other challenges that come from other places other than attackers, like changes in technology. And so it's all about, the classic OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. If your OODA loop is going faster than the attackers, then ultimately you win. And so then the question is, how do you become faster? It's like a lot of things in security and IT. It's easy to say we should be fast and then do nothing and you're still not fast. The way I kind of think about this, and you'll sometimes hear me use the phrase moving from artisanal to industrial, is you get fast by scaling what you do. And a lot of security teams today are fantastic people, fantastic teams, but they're like artisanal craftsmen. They have their own unique way of doing things. They have their own little tools. They're not running at industrial scale. And so when you see the truly great security teams, and these are not necessarily just in big organizations, they can be in many different types of organizations, they've mastered the act of industrial scaling what they do. So it's automation, it's shared tooling, it's embedding things in their environment so that they can scale. In other words, they can amplify their artisanal skills at an industrial scale. And when you industrialize, you can move a lot quicker. And I think that's one of the keys to this.
I think that's quite an interesting point because you've seen it at the grander scale, right? Pretty big program for Google and Goldman. I look at this a lot in multiple industries, which is these artisanal individuals are actually a risk to organizations because if they leave, you lose a lot of that institutional knowledge. And in some companies, it's just the security guy, right? So I think you can create an industrial program in an organization of one or two people's security teams. And I think people don't love to document. People don't love to create process. And I think, like, if I look at some of the organizations you've built, you obviously had wonderful people in those programs, but they are replaceable and they are going to leave. And I think too often we have great programs because they have individual brilliance in them, but that's such a big business risk.
Yep. Well, exactly. And I think, this is, you got to engineer scale into the environment, and that's at multiple levels. It's building security into the foundation platforms. It's kind of the things we've often described as going from shift left to shift down. So it's in the platform. And then adopting things. I just did a blog last week about thinking about how do you take site reliability engineering principles and apply them to controls. And so control reliability engineering is thinking about how do we systematize, industrialize the management and embedding of controls. So again, you're taking advantage of people's wonderful skills and expertise, but they contribute to the whole as a system that becomes part of this fabric that is just self-sustaining, exactly to your point.
Do you think that is a cultural leadership challenge? And like as a CISO or a CEO of an organization, it is utilizing and getting them to buy into the common good versus people are quite selfish, right? They do what's best for them.
Yeah, no, I think it is. I think one of the perhaps undersold parts of great security leaders. So when you look at some of the very best security teams, again, it's not just because they've got the most management support or the most funding or they're working in a big tech organization. When you actually kind of strip away the detail, these CISOs who have the very best security teams are great organizational leaders. They know how to get support from the wider business and the technology teams. They develop leaders. I've often described the very best organizations as like CISO factories. They produce like excellent leaders. And there's a classic 80-20. When I looked at this, there's a small number of the Fortune 500 that have produced in their leadership development an outsized population of the CISOs that are now in the Fortune, and these are companies like Salesforce
crushed it.
JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Google. There's a whole set of them, and you just look at the CISOs in the Fortune 500, and a disproportionate amount of them come from that small set of organizations that have gone through this rigorous organizational development, career development process. And I think sometimes as a security community, we just underestimate the good old-fashioned value of leadership development, the culture of what you do, the organization of what you do, and it's so important.
To that note, I'm going to kind of two angles on that. So first, to underscore this need for just like good leadership, right? That is as a human-to-human skill and craft, and like any skill and craft, it can be developed over time, and it can be invested in. Even like just finding like as a security leader, finding like what is the framework, what are the principles that like work really well for you, and then educating your leaders. Like, so for me, the big one was the intent-based leadership from David Marquez framework, and I was like, this is incredible. And so moving into an organization that's going through transformation, you start developing these folks, and you're like, great. Now that's how you really democratize. It's not by getting tools integrated to an SDLC. It's getting people to think like, okay, how can I as an individual, take the responsibility with the authority and make the decisions where they're going, that kind of thing. And every leader's going to have something that is unique to them that they gravitate towards, but that pull through.
Well, and that's like the evolution of the CISO role is the very best CISOs are business executives that also happen to drive security for the organization. That they're a peer executive and they work with other peer executives to advance the mission of the company. And their particular focus just happens to be security. Just like the CFO is an executive of the company advancing the company whose particular focus happens to be finance and capital allocation and accounting.
Oh, I love that a lot. The language I've heard around this is this idea of like, who is your first team? And if you think as a security leader, your first team is the security org, like that's the team, you're going to really struggle to have the systematic changes we want to have or the growth. But if your first team is the exec team, the leadership team that you're a part of, then you are like, that's who you go to. And then you just happen to deliver those particular outcomes by running this particular organization.
No, exactly. I mean, so you hear this phrase about, when a CISO is going to get a seat at the table, a seat at the, and most CISOs I know that have reached that point of being a peer business executive with the rest of the C-suite, nobody blessed them to do that. They just sat down at the table and said, I'm here and this is what we're going to do. And everybody went, okay.
The seat's always there. It's like, are you ready to do that? And if the seat's not there, it'll become ready when you're ready.
That's right.
When the CISO is ready, the chair will appear. It's there it is. That'll be the fortune cookie. So we also know that incentives drive behavior. So I wanted to get your take because you've you have been advising a lot of the CEOs of the companies in your portfolio, and then before that in your role in Google and such. So when you were mentioning, Stu, earlier about like there's this organizational risk if you don't move your security program from artisanal to industrial. Now, we know that the CEO has a role to play in setting an expectation, and we know incentives drive behavior. So I am kind of curious if you have a point of view or perspective on like, how can a CEO show up in partnership with the CISO, right? It's the CISO's job to run the org, but get better alignment such that across all their communications, across the relationship that's being built at the exec team, that idea of moving from artisanal to industrial becomes part of the vernacular, the culture, the commentary that's happening,
Right.
and then the CISO can go operationalize it.
And I think it's the right way to frame it as incentives, like you started off with. And I think sometimes the incentives and drivers for a security program in the past have been very much grounded in loss avoidance or limiting reputational damage. And those are really, really important. You know, fundamentally, a big part of security is making sure bad things don't happen so you don't lose assets or customers or money. But I think historically we've kind of underplayed the more kind of offensive commercial aspects of security. Now, again, we have these kind of throwaway lines that essentially mean nothing, like security is an enabler and all of these things, which we all know to be true, but it's a bit of a cliche. But when you actually then go the level below that and say, what does it mean for security to make a difference for the organization? Is things like, for example, if you're going to retool the customer authentication process for online transactions because you want to reduce fraud rates and reduce account takeover. But if you do that in a way that incorporates good design, good process management, then you've got, lower lockouts, lower abandoned transactions, improved customer experience. You can deliver these kind of exquisite product feels. You do that. And then similarly, one of the other things, if you look at how to retool the software development lifecycle to improve security by making sure more of your software is capable of being rebuilt and reproduced at will. You do that, you get great security outcomes, but you also get great agility, productivity, time to market, reduced cost, improved reliability. So the more CISOs talk to the CEO and other executives to say, look, we can do security, but if we do it in a way, we're not just going to get security, we're going to get all of those improvements and all of those adjacent commercial benefits. The light bulbs start to go on amongst the executives to say, look, we can spend money here not to just use security as an enabler as a cliche or do loss avoidance, but we really can retool the environment to give us security, but give us so many other things as well.
I have a really good example of this. So there's obviously gambling is now legal in the US. There was a moment, I think earlier this year, where there was a security challenge logging into FanDuel.
Right.
So DraftKings saw an absolute rush because people who gamble want to gamble right now on something they see immediately. No one places a bet for next month. And getting customers is hard. And this security issue gave DraftKings, who had a different feature that was a little bit smoother, an opportunity to attract customers, right? And so I think, like, if you look at quick transactions, gambling is an obvious example, but like Goldman, people want to place a trade right now. And if your security program is full of high friction, people can do it somewhere else. And so I think if you think about that of like, hey, even if there's a secondary layer of authentication, which is, hey, they couldn't get in using this, so we send it to their email or whatever it is, like that drives more sales versus, hey, we're more safe.
Absolutely. And I think, when you look at CISOs and teams that do this well, they go across their businesses and they deliberately look for those adjacent benefits where they can sometimes do security in a different way that mitigates the same level of risk, but retool the security process so that it reduces customer friction, improves reliability, agility, efficiency, all those other things. One of the things that's fascinating, again, I think we underplay the human and psychological aspects of security management, because in many respects, CISOs and teams that do that, even if they don't find those adjacent benefits, because in some cases there may not be any, but the very fact that they went looking exhibited that they're a commercial, business-minded executive. And to all of those business lines and the CEO, they see somebody that's trying to work for those commercial outcomes. And even if they don't get the results, they're seen in a positive, engaging way that causes them to get more support. So it's like a lot of things. If you create that image of yourself as a business executive by trying to do these things, you become more trusted and you get better outcomes because you're capable of influencing more.
And what's quite interesting, obviously I work on the hiring side, I am seeing earlier and earlier stage companies looking for this in, truthfully, I will say, like younger, commercially minded security engineers. And I'm seeing 26, 27, 28-year-olds getting thrust, like, they've thought about things, they're thinking commercially, and they're getting into the head of security role because, look, they're sharp technically. They can, if in a 50-person organization, they can do enough themselves, but they can talk to customers. They're almost forward deployed security engineers while running a program. And I'm seeing people kind of cut the line to get in the seat really quickly. Like 15 years ago, you think you see a 27-year-old CISO. Like it's quite interesting to watch. And that technical acumen, I think, depending on the size, obviously carries a weight. It's probably more weighty earlier on. I think like in a role like Google and Goldman, you're probably more strategic business manager. You've got to stay on task, of course. But I'm seeing so many people being able to cut the line, being a commercially minded. And you can be early on in your career and you can go so far, so fast.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the things I've always loved about security, and exactly to that point, even more so than any other discipline, security people are pushed forward quicker because it's one of the few roles where you get to see all parts of the company, you get to look at all risks, you're working on all things, a lot is expected of you, and you get that higher visibility earlier in your career than I've seen many other roles get, whether you're in a large or a small company. It's fascinating.
And if you can make other people's life easier, you get love real quick. And then all of a sudden, and I've seen this at times where one of the engineers is not, like the CISO is not the go-to person. They see the engineer who comes in and fixes the engineers or legal or sales' problem, like, oh, that I just speak to that guy because he just gets it done. Versus the CISO who just says no, or we wrote a ticket or whatever.
Well, and then in doing that, they develop the trust with those people. So when it actually comes time for one of those moments where the security team have got to go, no, this is like throw the flag on the field. We've got to do this, even though you don't want to do it. At that point, everybody will listen because they've built that trust and credibility over that longer period. And again, we talk about security should never be the department of no. But if we're honest, there's a few times like per year that you've really got to say no. But if you've always said no, it's like the boy who cried wolf is if you've always said no, you got to be really surprising when you say no and people sit up and pay attention, because before that you've said yes but or yes and to many other things.
I have one kid who cries all the time, so I don't know how to respond. I'm just like, yeah, it's probably fine. And then I have one kid, when she cries, I listen.
Yeah.
Zero Signal is brought to you by Hampton North. I've been responsible for building and turning around cybersecurity programs for companies where a lapse in security just isn't an option. Finance, high tech, AI. Different domains, but the same truth. The programs live and die on talent. And no strategy ships without the right people who share the right DNA. That's why I partner with Hampton North. I've built 3 cybersecurity teams with them, and every time they move faster than anyone else without sacrificing quality. While other agencies are still pushing paperwork, Hampton North already had vetted candidates in front of me. Their executive search is not one size fits all. With one of the largest networks of security leaders in the US, their leadership roles hit the market in days, sometimes hours. And their go-to-market practice covers CROs, CMOs, revenue leaders, and full team build-outs for scaling cybersecurity businesses. They meet every candidate, they reference every story. If you're ready to build and scale and grow your security program, go to hamptonnorth.com and see why brands like Clear, Instacart, Airtable, and OpenAI trust Hampton North to build great teams. Check out the link in the description. I think that's a really great example of just like you're finding moments, and even just the act of looking for moments to show how you're going to be driving a business forward. I was talking to another CISO not too long ago, and he said tongue in cheek, but it was super true. And it was like, there are 2 types of CISOs in the world. There are business forward CISOs, and there's everybody else.
Yeah.
Like that's it. And it's like, and I really do think that this is what's also changing. I'd love to get your take on the role as the CISO, the expectations of the CISO role, how it's changed over the last couple of years. As someone who's only been in the CISO role now for 2 organizations. So my tenure is slightly shorter than your tenure of being in the CISO seat. Tell us more of how you've seen it change over a period of time, because I do see there is more of a commercial leaning forward.
Yep.
There's also there's also a recognition in the market to say, okay, we need to know that we can trust these vendors in our supply chain, that they're going to be there in an adverse circumstance. We know resiliency comes with cyber, so therefore we lean in on this.
Yep.
So there is also an opportunity, a market opportunity. At the same time, there's this market pressure to come from this. Where are you seeing the CISO roles changing and adapting?
Yeah, so I think if you take a step back, so I've kind of written about this, what I call kind of CISO 2.0.
Yes,
which is there's three attributes. One is this business executive angle that we've just talked about. The second piece is what you might call technical empathy, which is the ability to partner with technology and engineering teams to build that security into the platform and not be the security leader that turns up and kind of wags their finger and says, you must do this. Because let's recognize things in many engineering and IT teams, they're under massive pressure. They're going through transformations. They've got legacy technology to replace. They've got all sorts of stuff to do. And the last thing they need is a security team coming and saying, you're a bunch of idiots unless you do X, Y, and Z. They've got to show up with some technical empathy. You've got to show up with your own engineers to partner with their engineers to build combined solutions. So that technical empathy of figuring out how to partner with the technology teams to get stuff embedded, to deliver all those other adjacent benefits becomes critical. And then the third thing, and this is a little bit paradoxical, is having long tenure. And so, but almost by definition, the CISOs that have been around a long time have more trust, can get more done. Now, everybody will then say, well, hang on a minute, there's lots of CISO turnover. But again, I have a lot of sympathy with CISOs that work in some organizations that turn up and they've got everything set against them. But to be fair, there's plenty of moments out there where I think some CISOs at the first sign of impediment have kind of given up and said, my organization doesn't support me. I'm going to go leave and work somewhere else.
I get a lot of those phone calls.
Right. and so this thing of I've had loads of moments in my career where I've never immediately got what I wanted. And those moments, you have a choice. You can either say, like, I just don't want to deal with this. I'm going to go work somewhere else. Or you can say, hang on a minute. It's perfectly reasonable that somebody would push back on me. I'm not going to get absolutely everything I want. So you push through that and you have another go and you reframe it and then you ask and then you persevere. Then all of a sudden things start to click into place and you get more resources, you're more trusted in the organization. And so as you get to year 2, year 3, year 5, you can pretty much kind of ask for anything and within reason you'll get it, but which you might not have gotten at 6 months. And so I think I encourage a lot of CISOs to, again, I'm not saying do this in a toxic, hostile, environment that literally doesn't care about it. But for a lot of organizations, they do care about security, but you got to persevere and educate leadership on how to do it. And then once you get to kind of, again, you see some of the most successful CISOs that are in years 5 to 10 or years 10 to 15 can pretty much get anything done because they're just part of the environment. They're one of the leading
trust
executives.
is built over time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
I always say to anyone who's stepping into a new CISO gig, most of the time there was someone there before and there's probably some scar tissue. And in the same way that when you enter a relationship with another human being, they already have predeceived, and the older you get and the older the company is, they're already going to have expectations, and your job is to reframe that, and no one is going to change that expectation immediately, and you can't win hearts and minds overnight. It does take time, and there's not normally a role posted because it's great. Right?
Yeah,
Like there's something has happened.
That's right. And then, the other dimension as well is, the bigger changes I see is there's a lot of stuff going on as a result of AI. And I think that you see many CISOs becoming more like the chief digital risk officer.
Yes.
And there's, I've seen this time and time again where a CISO, for example, is presenting to the board or engaging with an executive team, and they're talking about AI security. And so not just the risks of AI to security, but how to secure and control the AI being deployed in their critical business processes. And so they present all of their security strategy, and it's often great as much as it can be amidst all the turmoil of everything going on. But then the board or the executives turn around and go, well, what about safety? What about compliance? What about privacy? What about fairness? What about testing and validation? And the CISO goes, what, like me? And they go, yeah, we want you to do that. And effectively, they're taking on this mantle of broad digital risk. There's some exceptions to that, like in banks that have quite well-developed compliance teams and model risk management teams. But for most other regular organizations, it's falling a lot on the CISO, and they're kind of becoming the chief digital risk officer. And that's probably something to embrace. I mean, most CISOs have been saying for years, we want to take on a broader risk mantle. We want to become more like the chief risk officer. And now an opportunity is being laid on a platter for people to just pick up.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, we'll see how bad they really want it.
So, because that's interesting, because that is something that I've observed as well, is like this need. I think you introduced a few more components to that, which I think is really important. I think those who are listening should go back and read what you put around the CISO 2.0. But I'd love to get your take on this. So I'll put forward a thesis and get your reaction to it. And the thesis is the true outcome of a high functioning security program is a currency of trust. And the minimum, the 3 ingredients of that are going to be security, safety, and reliability. Security, are you free of an adversary to the best of your knowledge? Safety, are you operating within standard guardrails that you've created? And reliability, can you operate under adverse circumstances? If you can do that, then you can start to build trust as the outcome. What is your framing or thought around that?
No, I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would add, which is probably implied around it, is constant testing and validation so that what you think is in place, you know to be continuously true. One of the dimensions that I see a lot of companies get into trouble on, especially now with the deployment of AI, is their testing and validation practices are grounded in when change happens or when new things are introduced. And the problems with attributes like model drift and other types of issues with AI models is you've got to continuously test and validate across all of those things, whether it's security, safety, or reliability. And I think a lot of companies are struggling to adapt to that need of ongoing constant testing and validation. But I think that's the right way to look at things.
So we've definitely seen a movement, or the beginnings of a movement that I'm encouraging and I like, is this idea of moving our governance functions into continuous assurance and moving our GRC. Do you think that, what do you agree in the direction we're heading in? And if so, what might be some of the levers a security leader who wants to go down that path or accelerate that might be pulling? Going back to being a forward business-looking security-oriented officer of the company, how do we help companies kind of head down that path? Because there is a real investment in not only in retooling such that you can move to a world where you're doing continuous validation of your AI systems or continuous monitoring of your control stack.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the issues a lot of organizations have is when they approach more things to do with kind of continuous anything, whether it's continuous testing, continuous risk assessment, continuous controls validation, is to mainly approach that as an automation of the existing manual or other semi-automated activities. Yeah. So you get like this automation of something that was never that efficient in the first place. And the organizations that do this really well almost go back to first principles and say, what are we seeking to achieve, and redesign an automation process. And often where that gets them is a need to look at the controls, to redesign the controls so that the controls are more amenable to being continuously monitored. And that can actually be quite a tricky conversation. I've had this over a number of points in my career where we've wanted to put in place continuous control monitoring, continuous control validation. And it turned out a lot of the controls were great and effective controls, but they didn't emit enough kind of digital exhaust to let us validate what they were doing. And so I've had a lot of painful conversations with IT and business leaders that says, that control that's working kind of just nicely, it's not, because we can't continuously validate, so we need to replace or change it so it can't emit the evidence that we need to be able to do that continuous validation. And then you have to kind of bring out every tool of influence in your playbook around, well, if we do this, it's going to be cheaper and you'll get some payback from those costs. There'll be less central recharge for what we do to monitor these things, and you'll have more agility to change things. So you have to come out with all of those other adjacent benefits. But ultimately, many controls need retooling to emit to have the capability to be digitally monitored and be subject to that more appropriate automation.
And with that, there's also a lot of hard fought it's not easy to replace these legacy controls, because often there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get in the first place. And I remember rewinding the clock a little bit, there was this legacy AV system that was like, I walked into an organization and all their servers was using this legacy AV system. And I'm like, all right, guys, we're going to move this. We're moving to something that's got, ML detection. We're going to move the thing. And the systems engineers are like, oh no, this is my baby. This is my system. And I'm like, and it never emits a false positive. I'm like, never emits a false positive. Tell me more. Like, how'd you guys get that? And you get into, you're like, oh, you basically tuned it out of existence. So you just you've basically turned it off. And so there was this effort and pain that these engineers had gone through to get to this point where they're like, oh, it's finally stable, don't touch it. And then here comes along the new, director of security at this financial services company who's like, actually, we need to make some serious upgrades here. And having to navigate that early in my career, I just remember that the pain, the empathy, the technical empathy that you were mentioning earlier, being like, all right, we know we need to bring the horse to water here, but we have to walk them there. We can't just run there. And then realize that there has been pain and suffering that brought them here, and we have to deal with that trauma as we bring them into the next generation of whatever the solution is.
Well, and again, this is why I think more and more security teams now have much bigger engineering capability in their own right, so they can show up to those discussions with engineers who can get down, roll their sleeves up, get the work done with the other team's engineers. I mean, again, this is one of the things that, I take no credit for this. This happened way before my time at Google. One of the big principles of the Google security organization was that you have to come with solutions, to come with product, to come with engineering solutions. So when you went and said to a business unit or a product team, we want you to do this, the security team was showing up with the means for them to do that. So all they had to do was to integrate it. They didn't have to security didn't show up with a one-page policy and then leave behind and then come and check on them in 3 months. So a lot of the very, very best security teams show up with the solutions, with the engineering capability, and partner with those teams to do that.
Or for many organizations who aren't Google, I would encourage them to say, at minimum, show up with a perspective on how to solve for it and then co-design it with the engineers. And ultimately, the person who's going to operate it, the person who gets the call at 2:00 in the morning when it breaks, should have a say in how the thing was built and operated.
I mean, the other thing we didn't talk earlier about kind of the evolution of the CISO role is, there's another branch on the CISO journey, which I think is a temporary thing, but I'd be interested in your perspective, is the where the CISO is becoming like the CTO or the head of infrastructure. And I think there's a lot of patterns where you see the CISO as correctly and successfully championed with their executive leadership and board that they need to reinvest in improving infrastructure to create a more defensible technology environment. And then the board or the CEO has turned around and gone, okay, you do that. And the CISO is becoming the CTO. I think for a lot of those, it's more of a temporary thing while they upgrade infrastructure. But, that could continue to be a path of CISO to CTO or CIO.
And it has happened a lot. And I think it's good for it's mostly the really good CISOs that are getting it for what it's worth. And I've seen it like Anduril, it happened. I think Fox, it was, and there's a few others to kind of name. But I think it's interesting. We went so far on the department of not being the department of no that I think as CISOs, we start saying yes to everything. And I look at that. That's how people burn out, right? I see burnout as something that you should have said no to. And in an instance, you can help. But when everything is combined, it's actually a terrible use of your time. And I think because CISOs who've provided use and probably have a decent meaning of infrastructure, they can do it. But it's a lot. Like building a really secure infrastructure and something that is always reliable, that is a job in of itself. And whether it's temporary or whether it is a collective department, I don't know. But I look at like what is the most value in the future of AI. And I actually think like infrastructure, like secure, stable, reliable infrastructure, like the two are probably the most two important job functions, in my opinion, for the future of AI. So they are important, I think, because they're both so important together and they are codependent a little bit. Some people have said yes. And I think like a lot of these people will probably burn out because it's a hard job.
Right. There is also I know my last org, we were going through transformations. We had three different business units. We had like all these different SaaS products. And what would happen with the infrastructure teams is I would look at them and be like, all right, like we need like serious systemic structural change. So I would incubate them. I'd come in, I'd take they would be given the department, I'd get them up and running, get them stable, get them scaling, and then hand them over to the SVP of engineering and be like, please maintain and run, and here's how we're going to do it. But so sometimes you don't have to be the person who owns it forever, but you can be the person who owns it.
I've seen that. I used to do a lot of that in various of my prior organizations. We'd take a trouble spot, bring it in, almost like, and then do the Rubik's Cube, solve it, and then hand it over to another team. And then most of the time it would stay fixed. Every now and again, there'd be a bit of a boomerang and then you'd have to do something different. But I think that's a good approach as well.
So as we talk about CISO 2.0 and these new retooled security environments, how ready do you think the vendor ecosystem is?
Well, I think there's two parts to the vendor ecosystem. There's the good old kind of traditional vendors that are solving the problems we've always had for a long time. And then there's the vendor ecosystem that's dealing with some of the new challenges associated with AI. And then there's the dimension of kind of large and small, the big established players, whether it's the big IT players, the hyperscale clouds, as well as the larger cybersecurity companies and network security companies. So I think in each of those kind of different dimensions, everybody's doing different things. I think most companies are now starting to find the balance between how do I get the right security features built into the platforms I'm buying versus the cybersecurity tools I buy to kind of be the independent check or the independent control over that. And so again, when I was at Google Cloud, for example, we used to spend a lot of time trying to make sure that every product we shipped with full safeties on, with controls in it. And like there was, if I'm honest, there was some regular tension between what we, the security team, were driving into the base platform versus what the security products organization wanted to package and sell.
Yes.
And there's some there's some examples at the extremes. For example, like we were never going to charge for encryption. Just encryption in the storage should just be an absolute
Same
default.
with logs, right?
But then on the flip side, so it's interesting. Logs is the classic example. So nobody should charge for having logs, but if a customer wants to keep logs like for everything forever, then you probably should pay for the storage for that. And I think, so there's a continuum of things, but you do see, particularly in the hyperscale cloud, a good tension between what should be a base feature that's available for everybody for nothing versus what should be paid for. My view of this was always, and I don't claim I was 100% successful, but my view was you should never buy a product that you then have to buy another security product to make it safe.
Yeah.
Now you could buy a product that is essentially safe, but buy another product to help you manage it or manage it across multi-cloud or make it safer. But you should never have to buy something and then buy something from the same vendor to make it even just basically
Don't
safe.
buy the car and then the seatbelts.
Yeah, exactly.
The car should go, I get that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. I mean, so what I also see is I love your question about the vendor ecosystem, because as I talk to my peers, I'm like, some of them have this allergic reaction to vendors. And I'm like, come on, guys, like we've never built a program without partners or vendors. Like there's a few that we trust. What would be some of the characteristics that you see in really successful vendors? So people who come to the table with technologies or perspectives or platforms that really help CISOs meet the moment and build their security programs, and maybe accelerate the direction of their security programs. If you were speaking to the CEOs of the vendor companies, like what was the counsel you would give them to think about the products and how that they're bringing to market for the security community?
Well, so I think the main thing is the obvious one, but sadly sometimes it's so obvious it might not be done, which is what are you actually solving a real problem, as opposed to are you selling a technology? You're not selling a technology, you're selling a technology to solve a real problem. Can you articulate and successfully demonstrate that you're solving that problem? And then the secondary aspects of, if you're solving that problem and somebody else is already solving that problem, why are you better? Is it more capable? Is it doing it with less toil? Has it got less negative consequences to how you're solving that problem? And I think fundamentally as well is one of the things we talk to a lot of our companies about is don't just kind of fixate on selling to the CISO. For many organizations, the deputies to the CISO, whether it's the head of security operations, the head of AppSec, head of product security, head of supply chain, head of risk, these are very senior expert people who have, correct opinions about the tools they need to solve the problems they have. And, again, when I was a CISO, I didn't spend a lot of time with vendors because I didn't have to. I had some incredible people working for me. And if they said, I need this product from this vendor to solve this problem, 99 times out of 100, I would go, fine.
Yeah, that's your sales rep is your internal champion, right? Hey, pitch me as to why this is.
And I would never need, in fact, there could only really be a bad thing happened if I met with the vendor because I was already sold. It was only going to get unsold if that was not a great moment. I think there's variances to that. There are some CISOs that like to be engaged at that deep level. There are some CISOs that like to delegate. It all depends. And I think vendors, just like with any part of life, you have to navigate the situation. But ultimately, if you have a great product that is solving an actual problem and doing it in a very effective way and hopefully carrying some adjacent benefits or the ability to reduce toil or the ability to displace some older products, then you're going to be successful. I think the challenge at the moment in some of these new spaces is just so much noise and so much kind of confusion around what product solves what problem, because again, in this newer wave of AI technology, we've not quite crystallized yet what the actual problems are.
Yeah. And that's your full-time job now, right? As a partner of Ballistic Ventures, you are literally cutting through the noise. And this is something, I'd love your take on is Oh, you can hit a single fixing today's problem, but you hit home runs by fixing tomorrow's problem.
Yep.
So how much time and how do you think about what tomorrow's security problems
well,
are?
so we spend a lot of time thinking about these just kind of macro themes that are appearing. And, there's some things that are never going to change.
Yep.
These are the first principles of security, and you just have to reinvent them through every wave of change. But there's really kind of, I think some major themes that are occurring. And like one of the things we talk a lot about is the kind of democratization of capabilities. And so, it's our belief that every company wants to have great security. And if they don't, there is reasons for that. They either can't afford it, or they can't find the right people, or they can't find the right ability to do that. And so a lot of our investments recently have been around this notion of everybody wants great security, but they just don't have the ability to hire enough people with enough skills to deliver that to them. So wouldn't it be great if they could hire a product that is essentially a bunch of agents with inbuilt skills? So, for example, Kevin Mange's new company, Armadin, AI agents that do red teaming. Everybody would love a world-class red team. Almost nobody has been able to afford that over the years. And even big companies that can afford red teams can't afford enough of a red team to do red teaming of everything continuously. So now they can get that with a product. Another company I invested in recently is a company called Above Security, which does insider risk management. Same thing. Everybody would love a world-class insider risk program, but most companies have never been able to afford that. Now they can basically buy a product that's a bunch of agents that delivers them a world-class team. Similarly, we have a company, BreachRx, same thing. Everybody would love to have a world-class security incident response team. Most companies can't afford to do that. Now they can afford to do that. And so you see us kind of doing a play across that, which says everybody should have the ability to have the best capability and without necessarily having to hire only the best people.
A huge shout out to BreachRx team. I'm big fans. I saw them like two RSAs ago. We just sat down. It was them and a whiteboard and a notepad, and they're like, "Here's the problem we're trying to solve for." And I'm like, "I think you guys are onto something." So yeah.
Well, it's funny, and that's becoming even more important because I think we're seeing this kind of tidal wave of vulnerabilities hit. I don't think we've yet seen the incidents that come from that. I think there's early indication that there is going to be more incidents. Not necessarily all things are being reported yet. And so I think, when you think about companies that have an incident management process, they don't have so there's a lot of events they have to deal with, but there's not necessarily always a lot of incidents they have to manage in terms of coordination, disclosure, management with the board, all of that workflow of managing an incident. And I think what's probably going to happen soon is there's going to be more incidents to manage at once. There's going to be more types of incidents, not just a security incident. It could be like an AI safety failure, which is dropping on the security team, all these other. And then third, the other compounding factor is around the world, regulations are lowering the threshold for disclosure. So there'll be more incidents, more types of incidents, and more things that will be disclosable. So security incident management teams are going to have to deal with not just one thing every 2 weeks, but maybe 5 things every week. And that's why they're going to need this kind of workflow like BreachRx.
So I just had Matt Stamper. We did LinkedIn Live. We were talking about agentic threat actors, and he does a lot of tabletop exercises with that. He represents thousands of CISOs through the InfraGuard and the critical infrastructure. And he's been talking to CISOs, and the community he was talking with, and when CISOs raised his hand, is like, yeah. And he was prepping the board. It's like, we need to be prepared for not handling one agentic threat actor at a time. We need to be able to prepare to handle 5 breaches simultaneously. And that is just a shift set that is fundamentally different because you have the way you solve concurrent breaches or concurrent incidents is fundamentally different than trying to do one at a time.
It's fascinating because I've seen 3 big companies recently did tabletops where they simulated doing like 2 incidents at once. And it failed.
You can't. We're just
and it's maybe not even the security team. Maybe you've got like one outside counsel lawyer who is the person who helps you decide whether something is disclosable or not. And they have like one cycle, and if you put them through more than one cycle, they just can't do it, and it slows down the whole process. So it's just all of these aspects of not just detection response, but full incident management. Very few organizations are stress testing that of multiple incidents at once. And when they do that, I think they're going to realize they're going to need to move from kind of documents and spreadsheets to a full incident management platform to be able to do that.
And that goes back to your point at the beginning of the pod. It's like the difference between being artisanal and being industrial.
Yeah.
And we often think about that in the sense of like vulnerability remediation because we can see the big numbers. But the difference between 1 and 5 is a 5x difference.
Yeah.
Like it's a very big difference when you start thinking
That's
like,
right.
and then you just compound that over time. So I agree that's just another example of moving to like an industrial scale.
Yeah. I would actually, like, from a takeaway of CISOs listening to this, like, do a tabletop, even 2, like, and just see how it lands. I mean, most people, and again, I also think there is a problem. A lot of folks don't take this as seriously. It's like role plays in sales, like, oh yeah, like whatever. It's like, nah, like the building is on fire, and it's like now your car is also on fire. Like this is just a real problem. And yeah, I think like we are gonna be in an era where we're just constantly under siege, and I think we'll eventually become war-torn in the same way that some of the world, like you live in an area that is constantly bombed or under fire, and you become like, okay, I don't walk to school that way, which is nuts for us to ever think about, but like you just get used to this is how we're doing business, and I do think in soon that is going to be the life of the CISO. It's just, hey, like we're always just under siege and doing incidents.
Yeah, and in fact, again, you see many CISOs picking up disaster recovery and resiliency mantles. So it's not just on security, but the wider things. So again, you see, I mean, again, when I was at Goldman Sachs, I ran resiliency as well as security, and that actually was quite good because everything we did on the resiliency program of drills, exercises, capabilities actually benefited the security process, and that worked out really well.
And to the sense of like the sea change that we're under right now, from the adversarial side of it too, I just think about like the research work being put out by the CISO threat research team, and in their infrastructure that they have their view into how these adversaries are working. We're seeing this emergence of the agentic threat actor. We saw that with Jade Puffer, that was a big one a few months ago. But now 3% of the attacks that they see are agentic threat actors. And you're like, oh, it's 3%. I'm like, no, it didn't exist 6 months ago. And now 3% of the data are agentic threat actors. And this is a rate that's climbing. So
it's like, the dirty secret of security is there's always been more vulnerabilities that have gone unexploited than exploited. Because attackers have been resource constrained. They have bosses and budgets just like the rest of us. They've been resource constrained. Now, just like everybody else, they're going to go from artisanal to industrial. So they're going to industrialize their ability. And so everybody that was a target of opportunity that never happened to get exploited because the attackers were resource constrained, perhaps everybody's going to get exploited. Now, that doesn't mean it's kind of, you have to do AI to defend against AI. It compounds the need for this relentlessly enforced high baseline of security, whether it's multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, keeping things up to date. That just now becomes table stakes because you're not going to be able to hide in the sea of other targets. So, the question is, and there's a big open question for all of us, is these early indicators that is happening, is that really going to fully happen? And is that going to turn into a vast increase in incidents? I suspect it will, but it's an open question.
So as we begin to wrap here, when some of your most recent blog posts, you had this really little phrase, and it stuck with me, about being a near-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. This right now in the part of the pod, we're definitely in the pessimist side, right? You have agentic threat actors. We have this brittle infrastructure that we're desperately trying to protect. Bring us home to some optimism here. What is the medium to long-term optimism that you can see inside the cybersecurity community?
So I'm wildly long-term optimistic. I think ultimately AI, and we've said this for a long time when I was at Google, that AI is a profound advantage for defenders versus attackers. Defenders have this kind of home field advantage. They have a structural advantage. Defenders have the context, the data to adapt and use the models in asymmetric ways compared to attackers. And that's kind of different from what we've seen in the past. So I think defenders have a structural advantage. They've got to wield that advantage and do things to take advantage of that, though. But even just on some things, I mean, you just look at now at are we going to have, for the large open source projects, the large technology companies, the people have the ability to use these models to not just find vulnerabilities, but fix vulnerabilities. We could potentially have almost zero software vulnerabilities inside the next 2 years. Not for the whole world, but
I get your point,
for big segments of infrastructure. So again, you saw like Google Chrome pushed out a Chrome update last week, fixed 1,000 vulnerabilities. And you think, holy cow, 1,000 vulnerabilities. But that's 1,000 vulnerabilities
On
that are
everyone's browser.
now not going to be, and they're going to keep, applying things like Big Sleep and Nap Time and Codemender from Google in this relentless cycle, basically just eliminates vulnerabilities. And, the question is, what does that do to bug bounty prices? Are we going to see the first 50 million bug bounty because vulnerabilities are going to be so rare, it's worth paying for the extreme ones. Now, clearly that's not going to eliminate all vulnerabilities. That's software vulnerabilities. Yeah. We're still going to have misconfigurations. We're going to have human exploits. We're going to have all these other things. But again, AI plays there. When I was at Google Cloud, we were doing a lot to use AI to auto-generate secure configurations of cloud infrastructure. Some of our portfolio companies are using AI to help organizations deliver multi-cloud security in continuous validated ways that eliminate, all sorts of vulnerabilities. So I think this technology is going to get us there. And things like, again, I mentioned kind of Armadin, Kevin Mandia's new company, continuous red teaming. If you imagine a world where you are continuously testing yourself, all your infrastructure, all your software, all your attack services continuously tested, highlighting actual vulnerabilities, not false positives, real things that can be really exploited, and you prioritize fixing them potentially with AI augmentation in a fast fix loop. So you got a fast detect loop and a fast fix loop. That kind of drives vulnerability to zero. I mean, we're not there yet, but inside 2 years, I think we could see a radical change in the way we think about cybersecurity. Now, attackers aren't just going to give up. They're not going to go, oh, shucks, I should go get a regular job now.
They're probably long-term optimists as well.
Well, so they're going to think about, how does it play for scams? And we're already seeing a rise in scams. How does it play for, I think, again, the reason I spend a lot of time with companies like Above Security on insider risk is I think there's going to be more attackers coercing, extorting, or bribing insiders to induce vulnerability for outsiders to exploit. I think there's all of that is happening. So, we're going to continue to be in for a wild ride, but I think ultimately advantage goes to the defender, but defenders have got to adopt the advantage.
Yeah, I was going to say, only if we choose to keep the optimism and then keep really lean into the benefits that we have as an insider, as someone who owns the home field advantage, right? If we own the system, we own the context, we own the environment, we have an opportunity. But you're right, we have to lean into it and be prepared to do the hard work of building with that advantage.
Well, and I think there's also some new technology, some old technologies that we can see a renaissance again. So I was talking to some people this week here at Black Hat about deception technology. So when you look at some of the postmortems of some of these recent events, turns out that AI agents are a little bit, again, I'm not sure we're fully concluded on this, but early indications are that they're more susceptible to deception technology, honey tokens, honey traps, all of this other technology seems to disrupt them more than it has disrupted human attackers. And so maybe this wave of deception technology that never took off a few years ago is now going to see a renaissance because it's more confuses AI-driven attackers. And that's an open question. I've not seen real hardcore research on that, but there could be many other technologies that we bring back off the shelf that now have a renaissance.
I'm excited to see if we have that, because I often find that the security community is very good at solving problems and finding what is the first principles and how you solve this problem. What we often lack is it'll arrive at the wrong time in the market, or it won't have the business driver to go implement it. And so now this year has done anything, has really shook the snow globe. And a lot of the things that you said, like deception technology, I remember when I was at Apollo Global Management, I was like, oh, you got to do this. And I'm like, I can barely handle my real infrastructure. I'm not going to do a second infrastructure.
No, that's right. That's right.
But now it's all right, I can start to, agentically manage this new infrastructure where I don't have to my security engineers on my deception technologies. We've gotten a little better. All right. Well, Phil, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the pod. This has been an excellent conversation. Again, the amount of love I get when I go through the industry, I'm like, Phil's coming on the pod. Everyone's like, I love that guy. Yeah. So
it's good
just
to know.
Thank you. Yes, you're well loved. It's really good to have you on. Thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
If today's conversation gave you something useful, a framework, a question worth sitting with, a way to position something you're already dealing with, that's the point. Connect with Conor and I on LinkedIn. The links are in the show notes. Tell us what landed.
And if you know another security leader who's navigating the same pressure, text them this episode. We'll see you next time.
Resonate.